Good morning, everybody, and thanks again to everybody who's been able to attend this webinar. This is our fourth webinar, DataWorks. It's titled today, How the DPO role can be more effective beyond the audits. The good thing about this is that we have insights from DPOs across Africa and also from a European perspective. What we've done this time, quite uniquely, is we've been able to get a number of contributors on. As you can see from the next screen, we've got the kind presence of NITDA, who are involved with us as well, Data Privacy Manager, SPA, Ajibade & Co., and of course our humble selves, DataWorks. In terms of our panelists today, may I say, we have an exciting lineup. Of 4 panelists, including DPOs from different spheres of life and different sectors. But before I go on, the whole context of the DPO role. Now, many of us, even 5 years ago, were not conversant with what a DPO did. We didn't even know the role existed. We didn't understand what our data was about. The onset of GDPR, of course, brought the DPO into the spotlight. Closer to home in Africa, predominantly, people still ask to this day or this minute. I was even asked last week, what do you think a DPO should do? To which I said, I'm not a DPO. I don't know. I have had discussions with other DPOs and asked them, what do they do from day to day? And that's always been a challenge. Some people think they're sleuths or like detectives behind the scenes. Others think they have only the CEO's ear and can pass on different messages. Others think, it should be one of those where, quote unquote, they're like an emperor with lots of cloths and lots of layers. But it is more complex than that. And the beauty about it is that we won't need to have all those questions to mind without answers. They will be answered for us today. So if I may go on to our distinguished panelists today, I'll introduce them very quickly. We have Olufemi Daniel, who is the current vice chair of PRIDA, which is the Policy and Regulation Initiative for Digital Africa. He is the incumbent NDPR desk officer at the National Information Technology Development Agency in Nigeria, where he leads the regulation, monitoring, and compliance function. As a certified data protection lawyer, Femi has also authored an introduction to computer law in Nigeria, as well as 3 other well-received books. He's expanded the knowledge base in the IT sector through numerous publications, essays, and speeches. He's also a humble founder of techlaw.ng, for those who care to defer to that. I also have Florence Mwabweze, who is a senior compliance and counsel and data protection officer at Seplat Petroleum Development Company, an indigenous Nigerian exploration company, and the production company listed on the Nigerian and London Stock Exchange. She established and monitors a highly collaborative compliance universe, and deploys initiatives to ensure compliance with regulations, including GDPR and NDPR. She's also a lawyer, dare I say as well. So for those who are wondering why we have a lot of lawyers, the best is yet to come. I also have on our distinguished list of panelists, John Oyido. John is a partner at SPA Ajibade & Co., where he heads up the data protection and privacy practice, intellectual property and technological department. He holds a law degree, and to his humble credit, as he doesn't like to talk so much, he also has a triple postgraduate degrees, including an LLM in intellectual property law from the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law in New York. He also provides significant advisory services on privacy and data protection matters to the world's leading technology companies, and sits currently on board the Corporate Lawyer magazine based in the UK. So welcome, John.
Good morning.
I also have present within our panelists, Davor Namjesnik. Davor is the current incumbent DPO of Sberbank, a position he has held for over 4 years. He has also been integral to implementing GDPR within the financial institutions, major financial institutions as we had in Europe. He's also participated in the implementation of the National Loan Register, which under his watch involved all relevant financial institutions in Russia. Prior to joining Sberbank, he worked as an information security auditor. I am by name Joe Dede, and for this session, I'm your moderator. I'm currently a partner with DataWorks Analytics, and have had in my journey within ID services as well as data protection. So I'd like to welcome you all and our panelists to this session.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Now, in terms of context and all that, I would like to open the session by asking Femi a simple question to start the session. How do you see the role of the data protection officer at this point in time?
Well, that is good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for having me on this very important panel. Yes, the DPO is actually that role is central to implementation of data protection. Across the world, that always, since the DPR came on board, the issue of who the DPO is supposed to be the gatekeeper, supposed to be the compliance executive, and it's supposed to actually be someone that has a very independent approach to resolving issues.
If we may, I will move on, albeit briefly, to Florence. What would you say in your capacity as a DPO for your company at this point in time? What would you say were the next steps you took after the audit on the journey towards compliance?
Thank you very much, Joe. And let me just start by saying thank you, appreciating the organizers for, providing this platform to share my journey and experience as a data protection officer. In terms of the next steps for us in approaching the audit and implementing the audit's recommendation, our approach was simple. So our approach to managing the risk that we identified during the audit process was thoroughly influenced by my organization's ethos, and the ethos is zero tolerance to non-compliance. Now, in the course of the audit, we had identified the specific functional and business areas that had the highest risk exposures. And they're quite, if you think about it in terms of HR for employee data, the supply chain aspect of it, or procurement, as some other companies will have for vendor data, finances, different kind of things, including surveillance systems and IT. And so we had those departments that had the high exposure to data privacy, and we then went to, after identifying them, we conducted the data impact assessments on the projects and the processes in these specific areas, and also then went ahead to extensively engage with all the process owners. As soon as we identified the gaps, our focus was on the best way that we could plug the gaps and nullify the risk. Because, at the end of this entire thing, the important aspect we're looking at is identifying the risk and plugging those risks. And
Femi, are you back with us?
Yes, I am. I was just concluding my thoughts to say that the DPO has increasingly the DPO is going to be more of someone who is going to be very integral to the business, the business processes. So every new product that needs to be initiated, you need someone from the DPO, the data protection officer, that needs to work with you in the process of product development. You need a DPO to to advise management about strategy implementation. You need a DPO to even consider the risk, the level of breaches going on now, and some of the issues arising with big tech shows that you need a DPO goes beyond just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. You need someone who has a long-term strategy to be able to help the organization. So I see the DPO going in the next 10 years. A lot of DPOs are going to actually be taking roles as CEOs, because by you being a DPO, you are going to you would have had a wealth of knowledge in a digitally digitally minded organization to know everything, something about every aspect of the business unit. So, I mean, it's a very, very challenging role and full of opportunities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Femi. Thanks for that. I think what you have in terms of setting the scene, continuing this discussion, is that yes, the DPO role is going to be one that is going to have many layers and could even lead to some CEOs maybe feeling slightly on edge, but hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But we'll move on slightly to our next panelist. John, if we could hear from you at this point in time. My question to you is simply this. Has the NDPR really made a difference to the data protection landscape in Nigeria at this point in time?
Yeah, good morning once again, Joe. Thanks for inviting my firm to participate, and kudos on putting this wonderful program together. Prior to 2019, I would say that the recognition of privacy rights and data protection was almost non-existent. And so with the introduction of the NDPR that year, there was a dramatic shift in attitude. Prior to that, there were sector-specific laws that applied to particular industries regarding privacy rights, and more importantly, the provision in the Constitution in Section 37 that regulates the right to privacy. But that particular provision, if you look at it, was very cryptic. It is very cryptic, and doesn't really say much. So the benefit of the NDPR was to flesh out that particular provision into its component units, and then give the citizens and corporate entities a clear view of what privacy rights entails, and the need to protect privacy, personal data of citizens. So the NDPR also implements I think the first pillar of the national digital economy policy and strategy of the federal government, which deals with developmental regulation. And so the NDPR is a very important component of the federal government's drive to unlock the digital economy for the benefit of the country. If you look at the report submitted by NITDA for 2019 and 2020, you would see the remarkable achievements of NITDA through the implementation of the NDPR. In terms of enforcement, approximately 635 audit reports filed from various sectors, 13 sectors of the economy, with the financial sector, services sector leading the pack. The implementation process of the NDPR has also generated significant revenue for the federal government in excess of 12 million naira within a very short period. Jobs have been created, looking also at the data supplied by NITDA, over 2,600 new job roles have been created, 790 cases addressed and resolved. So the NDPR has been very, very important in increasing the awareness of the citizens regarding privacy rights, regarding the need to protect data, recognizing the importance of data management and the benefits inherent in that particular regulation.
Thank you very much for that. And I say, I'll come back to you as well, because there's another viewpoint I want to touch on with yourself, but the initial stats that you provided, they're also very interesting. So I'll definitely be coming back to you with some more insights. Davo, if I may defer to you at this point, I have a slightly two-pronged question for you. So you might see yourself answering to it. But my first question to you is this: what is your advice to your Nigerian contemporaries or African contemporaries as a whole on how to introduce a culture of data protection within their organizations? And then secondly, what's your advice on how to secure a budget for NDPR compliance, because budgets, as you know, can sometimes be squeezed or tightened within most companies. Thank you.
Okay, just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for inviting me on this conference. So actually, let's start with your first question. What is advice to your colleagues for introducing a culture of data protection within the organization? So basically, it become clear that data privacy is imperative for any organization that collects or use personal data. And let's face it, that's pretty much every organization. For certainly, creating data protection culture is presenting a big challenge. I even can conclude that organizations failed in implementation data protection culture are failed and unable to demonstrate accountability as requested from GDPR, and that is lawfulness, fairness of transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality of personal data. But developing this culture significantly helps to organization and of course to data protection officer to achieve organization goals when we are speaking about alignment with data protection law. So if we speak about methods to achieve and increase the protection privacy culture, primary organization needs to first have established some data protection policy. But let's face it, this is just the top. This is the top of the iceberg. I will share with you some examples which actually I use in promoting data culture inside of our organization. One of the most and important things is to make familiar all the employees process personal data about risk which can happen if we lost confidentiality, integrity, or the availability of personal data. The best way to achieve this is through the awareness training, which are specifically created for certain area because there is no one-fit-all training. And then we need to speak about data protection. Some of the examples of increasing culture inside of the organization should be, first of all, top management. So you need to have strong support from your top management because getting the leadership on board is an imperative. Second of all, it's as we did is include the key people inside the organization and on the organization unit to be promoter of data protection culture inside of their organization units. And also for the new employees, every time when someone new joined to the company, it's very important to introduce him with data protection concept and concerns. And it's much easier to shape the new people than sometimes the people who are already for certain years inside of some organization and then used to do things on certain way. So promoting data culture is all on awareness and sending important messages to all employees concerning to data protection, but it should be through the real life examples and pointing the all negative effect in the case of losing this confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal data. So to conclude, awareness is the best way to achieve this objective. And now I will try to answer your second question about budget for compliance. So despite of the organization, data processing is more or less part of every business processes. One of things that every DPO should have is some kind of tool which will help him to achieve these organization goals in the way of compliance with the data protection regulation. Actually, this tool which help him to have better overview over the organization processing activities. Let's face it, if you don't have overview over all processing activities inside of your organization, you are going to be unable to manage it. So definitely first step is to enable to DPOs some of these tools which help you in achieving your these everyday activities, especially in the yes. So actually you need to have some kind of tool which help you to monitor and to be familiar for all activities of data processing.
Thank you very much, Davo. That's quite insightful. I think obviously I'm sure some of those steps are also being carried out with by African DPOs and also within the context of the companies dealing with. But sometimes there are some barriers within certain companies, and this sometimes gives room for the need to sort of revisit some of these things again and sort of reapply them. So thank you for that generous insight, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to you in due course. I also wanted to mention to our attendees that we'll be running a number of polls after during the course of this session. There are two polls, the first of which will commence after John has given us a brief insight on from this next set of questions I'm going to ask. My second question, and I did say I was going to come back to you, John, was in the context of where we left off. What would you say would what would be your advice to organizations that are yet to commence the NDPR journey? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I would say the sooner they get their act together, the better. When the NITDA was set up and the NDPR was introduced, the regulator embarked on enforcement of that particular instrument with vigor, but that effort was stalled with the pandemic last year. And so if you look at the enforcement report recently released, you see that NITDA has gone back to enforcement, strict enforcement. And without waving a big stick over anybody, you wouldn't want to be at the receiving end of the enforcement efforts of the NITDA. So I'd encourage you to get your act together and start implementing the processes and putting the infrastructure in place for compliance. There are stiff penalties that are provided for in the NDPR, and apart from corporate liability, there's individual liability for the officers themselves. So the individual officers, if they are found to have contributed to the infraction, could be held personally liable in the individual capacities. Some of them who belong to regulatory bodies, like I belong, for instance, to the NBA, I could be proceeded against through the legal practitioners disciplinary committee. So you wouldn't want to lose your practice license because of non-adherence to the provisions of the NDPR. And also, infraction of the NDPR constitutes an offense under the enabling law of the NITDA, the NITDA Act of 2007, and may constitute a criminal offense. And so the stigma of a criminal conviction is something you'd want to avoid. But most importantly is the corporate image of the firm. I practice intellectual property and I deal with trademarks and branding on a regular basis. You wouldn't want to put your corporate image at jeopardy or at risk. And so non-compliance is something you want to be wary of, because your consumers, your clients, those who patronize your services would want to stay away from you if you abuse their data, their personal data, and if you take liberties with their rights and their dignity as individuals. So you want to protect the image of your corporate entity, and then you also want to avoid civil liability, because under Section 37 of the Constitution, the individual whose rights have been infringed can proceed against you also for civil liability at the Federal High Court in Lagos. These are just some of the consequences you want to avoid as a corporate entity going forward. And the sooner you start, the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That's food for thought, I think, for some of us or some people who maybe take some of these things for granted, and when they read or hear about certain things on various platforms and in the papers, they start to wonder whether these engines work. I think, as you quite rightly elaborated on, the things that will become more apparent once the enforcement becomes more ramped up. And obviously once, unfortunately, there are cases that are brought to the forefront, because how can enforcement or as a consequence of breaches be seen to be working if there aren't any actual culprits? Hopefully there won't be too many, but you know, this is one of the things that happened, I guess, obviously with GDPR. So the same may happen in the context of wider things within NDPR and within obviously work that NITDA itself has to carry. You're about to see, for the attendees, you're about to see our first poll, which will be popping up on the screen very shortly. Do please provide your contribution and obviously an answer. And it's always good to have these things, because they do provide an index or an indices for how certain things are working. So we hope you find them interesting. You know, it's going to pop up very shortly. So please do provide some context. Like I said earlier, I do believe we have Florence back now, and obviously we've got Femi with us. So we'll be moving on to both of them kindly once you've completed. If I may also add on to this, I think the role of the DPO is always going to have its challenges, regardless of which terrain they're in. So be it in Europe, or be it in Africa, or be it in specific countries. I think what will happen naturally is that as time goes on, the DPO role will continue to gain more prominence. And I think, as some of our panelists have already touched on, there may be even a time when the de facto DPO becomes a CEO. However, that will provide its own questions and answers to those observers who may be looking at things a little bit more forensically. So we move on to the next part of the segment. Okay, from initial observations with regards to polling, the question was simply this: what is NDPR? Obviously, majority of our respondents answered it's a Nigerian regulation that aims to standardize the governance of personal information, particularly in terms of the security and protection of personal data. So thank you for those who responded. So if I may move on to the next phase of our segment. Okay, Florence, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
If I could, I know we didn't get the chance to go through all your questions, but if I may move on, within the context of the NDPR, what has been your journey into data protection? And as a second pointer, how have you prepared and equipped yourself to ensure that you're able to deliver on your responsibilities as a data protection officer?
Okay, so just to say, it's been an interesting journey. Taking up the role of the DPO, it came at a time when I was really inundated with work. And so personally, I doubted the capacity to take on additional work, especially when you consider the extent and magnitude of the regulation. And it was uncharted territory. It was a new space to be in, but luckily for us, we are a dual listed company in Seplat, and because of our dual listing, we have also had to comply with the GDPR, and the GDPR came out the year before. So between 2018 and 19, when the NDPR came out, we had started putting some groundwork that will help us comply. So that kind of eased the way a bit. Now, one thing you will know with being a DPO is that there's a lot of pressure. Everybody expects you to know everything. Asking, oh, you're the DPO to know everything. And with that external, but to try and develop your. Fortunately for us, my organization has a well-developed development program aimed at closing such gaps. So personally on that journey, the journey of being a DPO, I must commend the DPCOs. They were really helpful, and they came through with expert advice when required. And you can't be a data protection officer without holding on to your data Bible, if I may say so. And so the NDPR and the GDPR for me became the privacy Bible. So aside from reading the text, you need to understand how it fits into what your organization does. That way you're dealing with, you're not going to try to implement a one size fits all cap for every part of the organization.
Okay, Femi, are you
Yes, I'm
close
here.
by? What kind of advice would you offer a DPO in preparation for a data breach? That's the first question. And leading on from there, how should a DPO handle data breach if and when it does occur?
So every DPO needs to have a plan in place, because whether today or sometime in the future, a breach would likely happen. So the first thing I would suggest to any DPO is, number one, there needs to be a breach remediation plan. What would happen when there is a breach? And you do that by actually writing down your processes and actions you would take in the case of a particular breach. And part of it would be that, who do you need to contact? Who are the people that needs to know about it? An incident or a breach. An incident may just be a potential breach which did not really crystallize. But when you are sure that this has actually led to the exposure of data, who do you need to talk to?
Thank you very much. Insightful and brief, again, as always, Femi. So I hope our attendees have been able to gain a perspective of the kind of challenges that you face. If I may move on, Davo, and again, I always get you in the middle of these two-pronged questions. But the first part of my question is, what would you say were the daily tasks expected of a data protection officer? And leading on from that, how would you, as a data protection officer, use technology to be more effective in your role as a data protection officer? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Oh, okay. How to describe one day? It's very hard to describe one day. It's not,
especially in 3 minutes.
Yes, and because it's not every day the same, but usually most of the time you get this service access request and you need to resolve it. And monitoring of compliance of processing activities, of course. There is data register, which you need to overview, and with all its processing activities which are inside. So if we are speaking about responsibility, so let's go to speak about these some 6 general sections. We have operational function, monitoring of compliance function, advisory function, cooperation with and consultation with data protection authority, handling data subject request, and information and raising awareness. These all are responsibilities which data protection officer must handle. So let me little speak about this first organizational function. And inside of this domain, we can put, so creating this data register, which obligatory by, I will speak about general data protection regulation because I'm from Europe and I'm more familiar with this regulation. So it's creating this data register of personal data processing operation, review the personal data processing operation, assessing the risk posed by the personal data processing operation, and on the end dealing with the operation that are likely to result in a high risk. So the mention above, it's very important. This part I'm going to actually try to explain how to use technique, because if you want to monitor some data processing activities and to see they are compliant with data protection regulation, you need to have some tool, and this tool is going to give you all proper information about which organization unit process what kind of data for which purpose, based on which legal ground, what is the source, how do they get this personal data, what is the output, and where are going to store this, where they are going to store this personal data. So it's very important to have some tool or which going to help you to overview all these activities. I'm just going to mention from the bank perspective. For example, inside of the bank, we have about 300 processing activities. So this is a lot of data processing activities, they are regularly and on daily basis. So it would be impossible for me to track and to know all of them if I do not use some technique or tool or application which is going to help me with this. And when you have such a tool, then you are going to be it's going to be much easier to actually review it, to see it, where are the gaps, how you can improve it, and communicate with these stakeholders about all activities which you need to be taken to actually be more data protection compliant. Thank you.
Friends, I think that is very insightful. Thanks, Davo. I think, yes, in the brief time allotted, I know maybe given a different environment or with a workshop, maybe it will be one of those where we'll need to think about, where you can obviously get the chance to expatiate more on some of the tools, and if there are any tricks. I don't believe there are any tricks of the trade. I think it's a case of just hard graft and endeavor, but as you've quite succinctly alluded to, it's just one of those things that are part and parcel of the whole process. If I may move on before we go into our Q&A session, John, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I wanted to ask you very briefly. Well, I'm sure it's a brief answer, but I don't know. What does the future really hold for data protection in Nigeria? Not that I'm asking you to come to use a crystal ball, but from your own insights and what you've been exposed to. Thank you.
I think the future looks bright, but it all depends on how we manage and continue to implement what NITDA has done and achieved so far. Of course, there are certain bottlenecks, there are certain inhibitions that they are confronting, lack of resources, lack of adequate personnel, lack of wide enforcement powers. Some of these are going to be addressed in the proposed data protection bill that is still pending with the Legislative House. The establishment of a data protection commission proposed under that legislation is something that everybody is looking forward to also. But the important thing is to be able to utilize and enhance what has been achieved so far. So you don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. There's a lot has been accomplished so far, and we hope that the future commission will take advantage of all that's been accomplished. But beyond putting in place mechanisms, frameworks, and regulation of data protection rights and privacy, the most important part of it also is being able to trigger the benefits of data as a tool of value. And that's something that most developing countries are yet to harness. In developing countries, those of you who live there, you, Joe, Ade, and your colleagues, and Davos, you find that the society is planned. It's very planned because of availability of data. I worked in Manhattan for a couple of years, and within that 3.5 years that I worked with the law firm, I already had resources and benefits that I accrued. And that's because of the way through the social security benefits that are available to US citizens are there for me for just a very brief period of time. When I worked in Nigeria for 10 years in the 90s, before I traveled out of the country, those benefits were not there. The pension scheme was just introduced recently. So there's so many things that need to be done. The use of data for the distribution of social benefits, social resources, unlocking the benefits of credit. If people are able to access data properly, and in the banking sector, they can provide credit because they already know your credit history. They know whether you're capable of paying back funds that are lent to you. So, in elections, for instance, in East Africa, I think they've used it in agriculture, they've used it in election voting remotely. So there's so many benefits that are available to us if we can harness it. I was just reading recently, yesterday, Ancestry.com, the genealogical website that deals in DNA, has been acquired by Blackstone. Most of you might not know that. It was acquired in December last year for $4.7 billion. You'll be wondering what's Blackstone, a finance company and investment firm, doing with Ancestry.com. And they're telling us, oh, they're not going to deal with your DNA. They're not going to deal with all those things. We're just trying to take advantage of the subscription. 23andMe was acquired. Well, they went into a collaboration with GlaxoSmithKline regarding the data that 23andMe has generated. They have a client subscription of 12 million people. Now, the moral in giving this example is DNA sequencing is something that everybody knows is like the next big thing that's going to happen in biotechnology, in medical sciences, in formulating medical treatment for certain untreatable diseases. And so the pharmaceutical companies are very interested in this DNA data. But if you don't have a framework where there's proper respect for the rights of the citizens to their privacy and data protection, empowering the citizens to take charge of their data, you find there's going to be abuses. But once the framework is put in place, there's security, then the benefits of data utilization can be unlocked. And that is where I believe that Nigeria should be headed. In international relations, in formulating policies for international trade, in creating cooperation between states, there will be a need in the very near future for compliance. If you're not compliant, you're obviously going to deny yourself of foreign investments. So I see a bright future for Nigeria in terms of data protection and privacy, but it depends on how we continue to monitor this sector and take advantage of the resources that are inherent in it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John, for that insight. And yes, I guess the extra surprise there is obviously what you've mentioned in relation to big private equity firms and hedge fund, obviously acquiring companies that have spent years, decades collecting and collating data. What and how will that data really be used? How will it be protected? And how, most importantly, will a DPO or a company within the context of things handle their interactions with people? I would like to move on to our question and answer session. The question was, in the EU, violators of the GDPR may be fined up to 20 million euros or up to 4% of the annual worldwide turnover of the preceding financial year in case of an enterprise. What is applicable? I beg your pardon. In the case of an enterprise, whichever is greater, what is applicable in Nigeria? I believe, Femi, you may have an answer for this question.
The applicable provision in Nigeria is in the annual gross revenue, you can be fined up to 2% of your annual gross revenue of the preceding year. That is the revenue that was declared in country within Nigeria for the preceding year, and up to 20 million naira. Now, whichever one is greater. So the reason, I don't know whether the questioner wants to know the reasoning behind it, but basically we did not extend our the fines to your global earning, because we needed to take baby steps to get to where we're going. So basically the answer is that it's 2% and up to 20 million naira of your revenue.
Thank you. We'll have a next. Thank you a lot, Femi, for that answer. And I hope that answered the question for the attendee that provided it. Our next question is from a gentleman, I believe, called Mohammed. His question is this. He's a lawyer with keen interest in data protection and data privacy. I've got 4 lawyers here, so I don't know who's going to answer that. I think, Florence, you might want to answer this. I would like to know any organizations offering a certification or qualification courses in becoming a DPO. Florence, either Florence, John, or Dab, but Florence, you first. If you could shed briefly any insight on that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. And hopefully my network won't throw me out again. So I think that I will let John throw more light on that in terms of organizations offering certification courses. I know there are a couple of them, but I haven't taken advantage of any yet. I'm still in the space where I've taken advantage of everything coming up from the ICO, from NITDA, and they have lots of really beautiful initiatives. I don't know, John or Femi might throw more light on those aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence.
Yeah, as a DPCO, I think we're authorized to train under the implementation framework. We're authorized to train DPOs and members of corporate entities that require specialized training. I know also that NITDA itself also organizes such trainings, and they also issue certifications. I stand to be corrected, Mr. Daniel. But as a DPCO, we are authorized to train, and for attending our training courses, we can give you a certification. Thank you.
Can I just quickly, Joe, can I just say?
Yes, of course you may, Femi.
Thank you. So NITDA provides awareness, general awareness. Our advice, the agency, is to refrain from competing with our licensees. So we do not really, except there is an arrangement that is, with a DPCO, we try not to be the sole trainers, because we have a lot of people that we have licensed. So John is correct in the sense that DPCOs are licensed to train, but there is also what NITDA is working on now. We want to standardize the curriculum for training. So everyone can be trained by anybody, but based on a particular curriculum, but there will be a standard setting institution outside of NITDA. That's the proposition we're making. I think I'm just giving a scoop of what is in the offering, is that we're going to have a standard setting institution outside of NITDA that will, of course, be accredited by NITDA in having met certain criteria, and the curriculum will be developed with all the DPCOs in agreement and some other key stakeholders, like some key DPOs with experience and all that will be. And so any certificate that is being issued would be one that we can say it applies to everybody, and there is a big minimum benchmark that will be put in place. So that is actually in the offering, and I'm hoping that before the end of the year, we would have been able to turn the corner in this. And I really see that as going to really bolster Nigeria's rating in terms of knowledge of data protection, because we would also be looking at a few African countries, because we want to position ourselves as the data protection country for Africa. So our DPOs can actually be able to be DPOs for 4 or 5 countries or all over Africa. That's where we want to be, and that's what we're working towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Femi. It'd be interesting to see where some of those developments and initiatives continue to gather momentum, and see how they spread in and around Africa. This question is for Davo. I have this from somebody called Okwe. Thank you for that question, Okwe. It says, and this to Davo, how do you balance your DPO responsibility to protect private data with regulatory and government interest in data collection? In particular, what do you do if an authority requests for wide, imprecise data that suggests fishing for data, but which the authority categorizes as relevant to investigations? This is for Davo. Davo, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here. So concerning this question, I will try to explain, but in the context of GDPR. So GDPR has 6 legal bases, and he says that everyone has right to privacy, but this is not mandatory. Why? Because if your local law give you that you need to do or reveal some personal information about to help in some investigation, to do government, to the authority, then you need to provide this information to them. What is important for every processing activity, and in this case, it will be reveal information to the government or the public agency or something like that, that this needs to be defined inside of the law or the act. This is very important to distinguish. GDPR is as a framework. I believe also in your regulation, which tackle with data privacy, it is framework. But sometimes the answer, do I have or how do I will process the personal data? I need to seek in some other acts or something like that. That's very important to notice, because GDPR do not prohibit anything. It just gives you the framework and answer. You need to look in some other act.
Thanks for that, Davo, and thanks for the clarification. And I hope, Okwe, that provided an answer to your question. So thanks for that question again. This question is from Taufik. I'm also cognizant. I'm also looking at time very closely, but I think we do have room for a couple of other questions. Taufik's question is rather straightforward. What is the qualification of the DPO in the EU and in Nigeria? So probably, Davo, you might want to share very, very briefly what that is, and I'll obviously put the same question again to Femi in case there's a difference in terms of school of thought. Thank you.
Okay, so qualification for data protection officer in Europe, there is no some strict requirement for this, but actually what is seeking for person who's going to have this role, it is very good to know of national law, very good know on data protection, be familiar with information, with IT technologies, and to have some audit skills. They are general and it's prescribed with this W25 working guideline, which actually more explain the things about some certain area, and especially in this case about data protection. So audit skill, knowing data protection regulation, and be familiar with information technology.
Thank you, Davo. Florence, if you'd like to shed some light on the second aspect of it, please, since we haven't heard too much from you. Thank you, Florence.
Thank you, Joe. So, I mean, this is the qualification for a DPO is one of those places where there's a bit of difference between the NDPR and the GDPR. So if you see, the NDPR just requires every controller to appoint a DPO, but it doesn't specify any requirements. It doesn't specify who that person will be, or neither does it contain, a list of what the person would do. But in addition to what Davo has mentioned, under the NDPR, you find that you find that the NDPR then provides specifics on functions or tasks of what the DPO should do, including information and advising, including monitoring compliance, including acting as contact points.
So thanks for that, and I hope that answered your question.
Just to add to what Davo
Yes,
and
please.
Florence had, yes, what Davos and Florence had mentioned, there are some hard, well, like Davos mentioned, even if we're going to have an act, I would not advise that we have every detail, in the act, and that's why you have regulations, you have guidance and guidelines and all that. Even the GDPR, there have been close to about 16 guidelines that have been issued since between 2018 and 2019, and it's still going. So, but just to help those, to help each and every one of us, aside from the issues about a bit of knowledge of IT, law, and regulation, you also need knowledge generally. A DPO needs to be a very widely, knowledgeable person. Then you need to have passion for the job, because starting off with the role, it looks very, uncharted, but you need passion to be able to stay on and continue to a point you can start getting results. Then a DPO needs to be impartial. You need to be someone that, because business units would come to you with different propositions. And don't forget that these business units, they have a budget, or they have an expectation that they need to meet. But your decisions and your judgments needs to be consistent over time. If you say to business unit A, you cannot launch this product or in this particular way because there is this risk that is going to outweigh our benefit, you must be consistent in that also for business unit B and C and D. That impartiality is very important so that you can be able to gain a respect among your colleagues. Then there's also need for leadership skills. A DPO needs to be able to relate with both the younger staff and the elder, the management in such a way that you must have leadership skill. It's very critical because you'll be giving a lot of talks, you'll be giving a lot of advice and all that. And then networking is also critical because it is not just about knowing what to do, but you also need to be able to get the right support.
Thank you, Femi. And leading on to that, I'm going to put you in the spot again. So apologies in advance. My question to you before I sort of go into final word and a poll and other viewpoints, possibly from Florence, we have her back. NITDA recently extended the deadline for filing an NDPR report from the 15th of March to 30th of June. From our experience, a huge number of organizations are yet to start because they think NITDA wouldn't be enforcing anytime soon. Why should organizations take the filing deadline serious if there is no enforcement? Could you shed some more light on that, Femi?
Yeah, so what I first tell people is that data protection and any regulatory framework needs maturation. Now, if talking about enforcement in Nigeria, I'll tell you that where enforcement is kicking off. We have 2020, we issued a fine against a government, a tax agency in Nigeria. 2021, we have issued a fine against a fintech. 2 weeks ago, we were in a top-tier bank to investigate an alleged breach. And we are also investigating currently about 7 different investigations. A loan company is being investigated. And many of these things are advanced stages. And I can assure you that before the end of the year, we'll have nothing less than 2 more announcements about issues about fine coming up on certain breaches. But we need to be very careful. We need to be very thoughtful about what we are doing as regulators. The issue, if people are waiting just for, because I'm not getting a fine, I'm not going to comply. What I'll just tell those people is that what is going to come upon you is even worse than a fine. Fine, we as government, we want businesses to continue. We want people to, we don't want jobs to be lost, but there are people who are coming into Nigeria now. By the virtue of what I do, we have a moderate knowledge of what is going on. People are coming into Nigeria just to look for breaches, and don't forget that every law in Nigeria, there is also the civil. Almost every law has a civil right component. So if you breach my data, I don't need to wait for NITDA to take you to court. I don't need to wait for police to take you, to task. I can actually take you to court. And the truth of the matter is that immediately we have 2 or 3 major class actions or decisions about data breaches. It's going to open up a wide door for people to, against a lot of companies. So what do I stand to lose if I comply? And so the issue is not about whether there is enforcement going on, but the enforcement is even about the integrity of your business, the integrity of your name. And don't also forget that last year we started something novel. We have been listing organizations that submitted their audit filing. This year, I'm very happy to say that we have far more than what we did last year. We've already crossed that number and we are heading to a record this year. It's going to continue growing. But imagine that your company is doing due diligence on companies in Nigeria, And just because you did not file your audit report, you lost a multi-billion naira valuation because you did not do what you're supposed to do. You could have done it with 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, but you refused to do it, and then you lost so much money. So it doesn't, for me, it doesn't make any business sense for any business to say, I am not going to comply because somebody is not taking, stick and guns running after me. So I mean, that to me, if I were a DPO, I would rather comply than wait for the effect of non-compliance, because we're in a global environment. If you're not complying with the NDPR, you're going to comply with other regulations which are more onerous, which are more tasking. So, I mean, the choice is ours, and I think the choice should be clear to everyone. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Femi. Sort of before I go on to that, I would obviously just like to say that it's good to hear that NITDA will not merely be a traffic policeman. I think the issues of enforcement and breaches and enforcement is pretty much going to be one that will be prevailing in our environment. I think as a lot of entities do enter into Nigeria or parts of Africa and want to do business that have cross-border relationships where there's the need for a multinational presence and movement of data in parallel, yes, there will be a need for there to be tighter regulation. And I'm sure with NITDA under the spotlight and it's gaining more prominence with a lot of what it's providing out there in terms of policy and information to other people that will take advantage of it. However, there is a need for us to be aware of threat actors and other stakeholders who are acting in a nefarious capacity to undermine anywhere they can access and take advantage of data. There's so many cases, both globally, both in Europe and probably that will rear their head, obviously, with Africa. A lot have gone unreported. I think as at the last time I took a spot check, on paper, there had been 600,000 breaches between this time last year and current date, and of course there's been a lot of enforcement and obviously class action suits still ongoing as well that have been brought to prominence. In terms of the role of the DPO within the wider context of things, look, there will always be a need for DPOs and their DPCOs as well to ensure that they're well up to speed and benefit from as much training and insights that can be brought out there. I don't think there is an answer or a simple formula for what approach should be taken. I think it's a case of, look, if you're passionate about the role, if you're ready to be committed and ready to stay the course of the journey, because it's not a 5-minute rule, it's not a 5-minute answer, 5 months, unfortunately, or 5 weeks, or even 5 years, it might be longer. You have to be committed to the role. You have to be ready to show some professionalism, as our esteemed DPOs have shown today, including Femi. You have to just be resilient and be able to stand the test of time. And also that will take one, stand one in good stead, and hopefully the likes of Nigeria that are aspiring to be the center of excellence in terms of all things data protection, and obviously be a pinnacle or bastion of self-excellence, will obviously put themselves at the forefront and be well represented. As we move on to sort of finish this session, the question is what is this biggest NDPR challenge faced by your organization? I believe that had been started, so apologies if that sort of came through earlier. And then a simple, the third question being, adopting a privacy-centric NDPR compliant approach brings no benefits whatsoever to a company. Again, I think most of you responded false to that. And I think there was a final question in that first poll that asked an organization, do you have measures, technical and non-technical, in place to enforce data protection in your organization? A simple yes or no, of which 59% of respondents responded yes, and obviously the latter no. So I'm going to put this off briefly and allow the second poll to be run, and I hope you can see that. Please type in the Q&A box or chat box if you're unable to see the second poll. This is in progress. So let's have your votes in. And while that is being run, if I may add, this series of webinars, and of course this DPO role for which we focus this webinar today, this would not be the only session we'll have where the DPO will be in the spotlight. So to those our panelists who feel they may have gotten off lightly or are relishing the prospect of joining us again on another session, please, we will be running another session, particularly on DPO, for the simple reason that the role is going to evolve. I'm sure by the time we have the next session, albeit maybe not in a week or a month's time, I'm sure there are certain things that may have changed as a consequence of regulation or as a consequence of other factors. There will never be a magic formula for how a DPO should or can perform. But I hope for the benefit of the attendees that they've been able to get some insight as to what a DPO does have to do, or what a DPO role most importantly entails. It's important to bear in mind that these things gradually evolve. I think even as recent as 5 years ago, the DPO was happy to be behind the scenes. Fear not, you have come out, your days are numbered, and you have to be sort of outside in a polite way. So you can't hide behind the curtain or behind the CEO. You may be the de facto DPO/CEO in the future. I'm going to share the results. I hope you can see them. The first question in our poll was, what does the acronym DPO stand for? So I'm sure a lot of you would have gained that. So everybody answered that took part answered that very succinctly. Number two, has the organization appointed the DPO? 60% of respondents said no. So that is a concern for those who haven't. And for those who have, 40%, thanks. But it's not just appointing a DPO, is ensuring that they have the right tools, techniques, and the right scope and remit under which to operate. So it's all well and good appointing a DPO, but you have to give them the right tools and techniques and empower them to do their work efficiently and effectively. That applies to whether you're in Europe or in Africa. Number three, which of these challenges do you believe a DPO will face in 2021 in their organization? I'm sure that will obviously move on to 2022 and subsequent years. It's interesting to see that most of the respondents simply replied all of the above, because you have, if I may briefly, you have obviously lack of support from key stakeholders, lack of cooperation, lack of personnel, budgetary constraints, and lack of independence as some of the barriers. So I would say, rightly so, all would apply. And the fourth question, just a simple yes or no answer again: has the organization completed or filed its NDPR report due by the 30th of June? Again, most of the respondents on this particular poll said no. 73% is very high. I would hope others do make an effort to inform their colleagues who are in this position, and obviously companies to take advantage of us. We at DataWorks do provide that service as well, if I may blow our trumpets. So it'd be good to see those people coming on board. And if I may, just before I round up, thanks to all our attendees for attending. And if I may, to Femi, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure you'll be back in due course. So thanks a lot, Femi, for joining us. Florence, thank you. And so thank you very, very much. And hopefully you join us again on our next session. Please look out for the DPO handbook, which we'll be sharing with everyone. And please visit our sites for other takeaways from this session. Stay safe. Thank you very much.